Welcome to a story that will touch your heart and show you how a single moment of attention can change countless lives. Today, we'll begin a journey that shocked the peaceful community of Springfield, Massachusetts, and revealed that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come from the most unexpected places. Before we start this emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this one. The autumn wind whispered through the maple trees lining Oakwood Avenue, sending crimson leaves dancing across Officer Sarah Mitchell's patrol car windshield. It was October 15th, 2023, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the well-maintained lawns of Springfield's most prestigious neighborhood. At 45, Sarah had spent 20 years on the force, and something about this crisp Monday morning made her especially alert. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247. Beginning my morning patrol of the East Side District," Sarah spoke into her radio, adjusting her rearview mirror. The familiar weight of her badge felt particularly heavy today, though she couldn't explain why. The colonial-style homes of Oakwood Avenue had always represented the picture-perfect American dream to her. White picket fences, manicured gardens, and the kind of neighbors who still brought casseroles when someone new moved in. But 20 years of police work had taught Sarah that the prettiest facades often hid the darkest secrets. As she cruised past number 1426, something caught her eye. A flash of movement in a second-story window of the Wheeler residence. She'd met Marcus Wheeler at various community events, a successful businessman who regularly donated to local charities and hosted fundraisers for the Children's Hospital. The property was immaculate, with its freshly painted blue shutters and carefully tended rose gardens. Sarah slowed the patrol car, her trained eye drawn to that second-story window again. There, pressed against the glass, was a small hand holding what appeared to be a piece of paper. Her heart skipped a beat as she made out the words written in shaky childish handwriting. "Help US, dispatch, this is Officer Mitchell. I'm going to need a welfare check at 1426, Oakwood Avenue," she radioed, pulling her vehicle to a stop. "Possible situation involving minors." The dispatcher's voice crackled back, "Copy that, Unit 247. Do you need backup?" Sarah studied the house carefully, noting details that her 2 decades of experience had taught her to observe. The curtains on the first floor were all drawn, unusual for this time of morning. The security cameras mounted at the corners of the house were high-end, more sophisticated than typical home security systems. And despite it being a Monday morning, Wheeler's black Mercedes was still in the driveway. "Stand by, dispatch. I'm going to do an initial assessment." Sarah approached the front door, her footsteps crunching on the gravel pathway. The morning silence was broken only by the distant sound of a lawn mower and the cheerful chirping of birds, a stark contrast to the growing unease in her gut. She pressed the doorbell, listening to its elegant chime echo inside the house. No response. She knocked firmly. "Springfield Police Department. Mr. Wheeler, are you home?" The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Sarah moved to the side of the door, years of training kicking in as she scanned the windows above. The paper was gone now, but she could have sworn she heard muffled movement inside. "Dispatch, request immediate backup at my location. Something's not right here." Sarah moved around the side of the house, noting the reinforced locks on all the windows, again, more extensive than typical home security. As she reached the back of the property, she heard it. A distinct cry, quickly muffled, coming from inside. That was all she needed to hear. "Dispatch, possible 207 in progress. I'm going to need additional units and detective support immediately." Sarah's hand moved to her weapon as she returned to the front door. The perfectly maintained exterior of 1426, Oakwood Avenue now seemed more menacing than pristine. Through the decorative glass panels flanking the door, she caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow passing quickly across the foyer. "Mr. Wheeler, this is Officer Mitchell. I need you to open the door now." The sound of breaking glass from somewhere inside the house shattered the morning calm. Sarah's decision was made in an instant. "Dispatch, I'm making entry." With practiced efficiency, she drew her weapon and positioned herself to kick the door. The solid would splintered around the lock on her second attempt, and Sarah entered the house, her flashlight beam cutting through the artificial darkness created by the drawn curtains. The interior was a study in contrasts. The foyer displayed expensive artwork and pristine hardwood floors, but Sarah's nose caught the distinct smell of fear and neglect. A sound from upstairs, multiple feet moving quickly, a muffled cry. "Police! Don't move!" Heavy footsteps thundered down the main staircase. Marcus Wheeler appeared, dressed in an impeccable business suit despite the early hour. His usual charitable fundraiser smile was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Officer Mitchell, this is a very unfortunate misunderstanding," he said smoothly, his hands raised in a gesture that seemed more mocking than compliant. "I was just about to leave for an important meeting." Sarah kept her weapon trained on Wheeler, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Step away from the stairs, Mr. Wheeler. Where are the children?" A flicker of something dark passed across Wheeler's face. "Children? I live alone, officer. You're breaking and entering based on what? A shadow in a window? My lawyer will have a field day with this." But Sarah's attention had shifted to a sound behind Wheeler, a floorboard creaking upstairs, followed by what was unmistakably a child's whimper. Wheeler heard it too, and his composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something that made Sarah's blood run cold. The distant wail of approaching sirens filled the air. Wheeler's expression hardened as he realized his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled, his philanthropist persona evaporating entirely. "Do you know who I am in this town? Who my friends are?" The sound of multiple police units screeching to a halt outside provided Sarah's answer. Her backup had arrived, but the real nightmare was just beginning. As fellow officers flooded into the house, Sarah knew that what they would discover in the coming hours would change not just her life, but the entire community of Springfield, forever. Behind Wheeler's designer suit and charitable donations, behind the pristine colonial facade of 1426 Oakwood Avenue, a darkness had been festering. And now, thanks to a child's desperate plea for help and a veteran officer's instincts, that darkness would finally be exposed to the light. The next 30 minutes at 1426 Oakwood Avenue unfolded like a carefully choreographed nightmare. As backup units secured the perimeter, Sarah Mitchell led the team clearing the house's upper floor, her flashlight beam cutting through the unnatural darkness of the drawn curtains. The wealth displayed downstairs gave way to something far more sinister above. Reinforced doors with electronic locks, windows secured with hidden bars, and cameras watching every angle. "Springfield PD, call out if you can hear us." Sarah's voice echoed through the hallway as her team methodically checked each room. The first two were empty, though the twin beds with restraints poorly hidden beneath designer quilts told their own horrifying story. It was in the third room that they found them. 7 children, ages ranging from what appeared to be 6 to 12, huddled together in a corner. Their wide eyes reflected the beams of the officers' flashlights, a mixture of terror and desperate hope on their faces. "It's okay now," Sarah said softly, holstering her weapon and kneeling down to their level. "We're here to help. You're safe." One girl, slightly older than the others with fierce determination in her green eyes, stepped forward protectively. "Are you really police?" Mr. Wheeler sometimes pretends things to trick us." The girl's voice carried a strength that belied her fragile appearance, and Sarah felt her heart simultaneously break and swell with admiration. "Yes, sweetie. I'm Officer Sarah Mitchell. See my badge?" She held it out where all the children could see it. "Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," the girl replied, her shoulders straightening slightly. "Emma Sullivan. I'm the one who made the sign. I've been keeping track of everything in my diary. The dates, the names, everything he did. I hid it where he couldn't find it." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted downstairs. Wheeler's voice boomed through the house, now stripped of its usual charm and dripping with barely contained rage. "You have no right. Do you know who I am in this community? One phone call and your entire career is over. Mitchell." Emma flinched at the sound of his voice, but her expression hardened. "He's lying. He always lies. He tells everyone he's helping kids through his charity. But he's the one who took us. All of us. Sarah turned to Officer Rodriguez, who had just finished radioing for multiple ambulances. Get the crisis response team here now, and contact FBI Special Agent Wilson. This case just went federal. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Medical teams arrived to check on the children, while crime scene investigators began the painstaking process of documenting every detail of the house. Sarah stayed with Emma and the others, watching as Child Welfare Services worked to identify each one and contact their families. Emma proved to be not just brave but incredibly resourceful. She had indeed kept a detailed diary, written in code on pages torn from school notebooks and hidden within a hollowed-out section of her mattress. I knew someone would find us eventually, she explained as she handed the pages to Sarah. I just had to make sure we had proof when they did. Meanwhile, in the kitchen below, Wheeler had transformed from the pillar of the community into something else entirely. Gone was the polished philanthropist who hosted charity galas. In his place sat a cornered predator, his expensive suit now rumpled, his carefully maintained facade cracking. You don't understand what you've done, he snarled at the detective attempting to interview him. I've protected those children, given them opportunities they never would have had. Ask anyone in town. I'm a respected businessman, a philanthropist. Sarah, who had come downstairs after ensuring the children were safely with medical personnel, felt her anger rise. A philanthropist? Is that what you call keeping children locked away? Using your charity as a cover to target vulnerable families? Wheeler's eyes narrowed as they fixed on her. Officer Mitchell, the bleeding heart of the Springfield PD. How long have you been waiting for something like this? A chance to make your mark? Well, enjoy your moment of glory. My lawyers will have this wrapped up by dinner. But Sarah could see the fear behind his bravado. Wheeler's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and he knew it. His phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from his high-powered friends, all suddenly eager to distance themselves from him. Special Agent David Rodriguez arrived from the FBI's Boston field office by early afternoon. Sarah watched as he reviewed Emma's diary, his expression growing grimmer with each page. This goes deeper than we thought, he said quietly to Sarah. Wheeler's charity, New Beginnings Foundation, operates in 3 states. We've had suspicions, but could never get enough evidence for a warrant. Until now, Sarah replied, thinking of Emma's careful documentation. That girl's incredible strength might have just broken this whole thing wide open. As evening approached, the true scope of Wheeler's operation began to emerge. His charity had specifically targeted vulnerable families, using its resources and connections to identify potential victims. The 7 children rescued from his home were likely just the beginning. Emma's parents arrived from Michigan, where she had gone missing 3 months ago. The reunion was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Emma clung to her mother, while still maintaining her protective watch over the younger children. She insisted on speaking to Sarah one last time before leaving. Officer Mitchell? Emma's voice was stronger now, though exhaustion showed in her eyes. There are others. Not here, but in other places. I heard him on the phone sometimes, talking about other houses, other kids. You have to find them too. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, just as she had done hours earlier. We will, Emma. I promise you. And it's all because of your bravery. You didn't just save yourself and the others here. You've helped us save many more children we don't even know about yet. As Emma left with her parents and the other children were reunited with their families, Sarah stood in the driveway of 1426 Oakwood Avenue, watching the crime scene teams continue their work under bright floodlights. The perfect facade of Wheeler's house now seemed hollow, its pristine exterior unable to hide the darkness that had lurked within. Wheeler himself had been transported to the federal detention center, but his earlier words echoed in Sarah's mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. His connections in the community ran deep, and tomorrow would bring a new battle against those who had enabled him, knowingly or unknowingly. But for tonight, 7 children were safe. 7 families were whole again. And somewhere in Michigan, a brave young girl named Emma Sullivan was finally heading home. Her hidden diary now transformed from a record of captivity into a key that would help unlock justice for countless others. As Sarah finally got into her patrol car to head back to the station, Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Rodriguez. "Watch your back. Wheeler's friends are already making calls. This is bigger than anyone imagined." Sarah looked once more at the house, its windows now dark except for the occasional flash of crime scene photographers' lights. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight had proven what she'd always believed, that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from the most unexpected sources, and that no matter how dark things seem, truth and justice will always find a way to light. The FBI's makeshift command center hummed with activity as dawn broke over Springfield. Sarah Mitchell stood before a wall of photographs and documents, her coffee growing cold in her hand. Each picture told a story: smiling charity galas where Marcus Wheeler rubbed shoulders with judges and politicians, newspaper clippings praising his philanthropic work, and most disturbingly, a map showing missing children cases across New England that potentially connected to his New Beginnings Foundation. "Officer Mitchell?" Special Agent David Rodriguez appeared at her side, his usually immaculate suit showing signs of a sleepless night. "We've got something from the financial records. Wheeler wasn't working alone. Not by a long shot." Sarah followed him to a computer station where analysts had been working through the night. Spreadsheets filled the screens, each telling a part of a larger, more sinister story. "Look at these donations," Rodriguez pointed to a series of transactions. "All from shell companies, all flowing through Wheeler's foundation, but then disappearing into offshore accounts. We're talking millions of dollars, Sarah. This isn't just about Wheeler anymore. He told me I didn't know what I was getting into," Sarah murmured, remembering Wheeler's threats. "How deep does this go, David?" Before he could answer, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Emma Sullivan's parents had arrived, looking exhausted but determined. Behind them stood Emma herself, clutching a worn backpack. "Emma insisted on coming," Mrs. Sullivan explained. "She says there's more we need to know." Sarah immediately moved to greet them, noting how Emma's eyes darted around the command center, taking in every detail. The girl's resilience continued to amaze her. "I brought everything," Emma said, opening her backpack. "Not just my diary, but things I collected. Papers I managed to hide when I cleaned his office. He never thought I could understand what they meant, but I did." The documents Emma produced over the next hour left the entire investigative team stunned. Carefully preserved letters, snippets of conversations she'd overheard and documented, even photographs she'd managed to take with an old cell phone she'd found and hidden. There were patterns, Emma explained, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. Every month, he'd have these fancy dinner parties. Important people would come, judges, politicians, business owners. They'd talk about the foundation, about helping children. But something felt wrong. They'd go into his study and talk for hours behind closed doors. Rodriguez spread the documents across a conference table, his expression growing darker. "Names, dates, locations. Emma, do you understand what you've done? You've given us a roadmap to their entire operation." Sarah watched as Emma's evidence was carefully cataloged and processed. The girl had managed to document far more than anyone could have expected. Names of Wheeler's associates, dates of suspicious meetings, even overheard phone conversations that suggested the existence of other houses like Wheeler's across New England. "There's something else," Emma said quietly, pulling out one final piece of paper. "I found this in his desk the day before you found us. It's about someone called the Benefactor." The document was a letter, written in careful, measured language that nonetheless sent chills down Sarah's spine. It detailed plans for expanding the Foundation's special program into other states, backed by someone with enough power and influence to ensure continued protection from law enforcement. As the day progressed, the investigation expanded exponentially. Wheeler's arrest had sent shockwaves through Springfield's elite circles. Judge Martin Harrison, a frequent guest at Wheeler's gatherings, had suddenly taken an extended leave of absence. School board director Patricia Coleman had resigned citing personal reasons. The carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. Sarah, Rodriguez called out late in the afternoon. "You need to see this." He led her to a separate room where technical analysts had been reviewing security footage from Wheeler's house. On the screen, time-stamped from just 2 weeks ago, they watched as a convoy of expensive cars arrived at Wheeler's home late at night. The passengers' faces were carefully turned away from cameras. But one figure was clearly recognizable, Mayor William Porter. "This goes all the way to City Hall," Sarah breathed. No wonder Wheeler was so confident about making calls. Emma, who had been helping investigators understand her documented evidence all day, appeared at Sarah's side. "There's more," she said. "The mayor, he came to the house 3 times while I was there. Each time, Mr. Wheeler would make sure we were all locked upstairs. But I could hear them arguing about something called Project Guardian." Rodriguez immediately began making calls, his voice urgent as he requested additional resources from the Boston field office. Sarah could see the investigation growing beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first spotted that desperate sign in the window. As evening approached, Emma's parents prepared to take her home. The girl had spent hours helping investigators, her testimony and evidence proving invaluable. Before leaving, she hugged Sarah tightly. "Officer Mitchell?" Emma's voice wavered for the first time that day. "Be careful. Mr. Wheeler, he used to talk about how anyone who tried to stop them would disappear. He said they had friends everywhere, police, judges, even in the FBI." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, just as she had done that first day. "Emma, listen to me. What you've done, the evidence you collected, the risks you took to document everything, it's going to help us bring down their entire network. They can't hide anymore. Thanks to you." After Emma left, Sarah and Rodriguez worked late into the night, piecing together the expanding puzzle. Wheeler's Foundation had operations in Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine, all connected through a web of shell companies and suspicious donations. But something still didn't add up. "The money," Rodriguez muttered, staring at the financial records. "Even with all these donations, there's more cash flow than we can account for. What else were they using these children for?" A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. A young analyst entered, looking nervous. "Agent Rodriguez, Officer Mitchell, we've found something in Wheeler's encrypted files. It looks like blueprints, dozens of them, properties all across New England, all owned by different shell companies, but with similar modifications to Wheeler's house." Sarah felt her blood run cold as she looked at the blueprints. Each house had the same security systems, the same reinforced doors and windows, the same hidden rooms. How many more children were out there waiting to be found? Her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. "Back off now, Officer Mitchell. Some stones are better left unturned." Sarah showed the message to Rodriguez, who immediately began procedures to trace it. But they both knew it was just the beginning. Wheeler's arrest had stirred up a hornet's nest, and powerful people were beginning to feel threatened. As she finally left the command center that night, Sarah noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked across the street. Pulled away as soon as she spotted it, but the message was clear. The real battle was just beginning, and the enemy was far more powerful than anyone had imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, and hopefully new breakthroughs. But for now, Sarah could take comfort in one thought. Thanks to Emma's incredible courage and foresight, they had the evidence they needed to start dismantling this network of corruption and exploitation. Wheeler's arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a much larger fight for justice. The Vermont Children's Home stood abandoned on a hilltop, its Victorian architecture a stark silhouette against the gray October sky. Sarah Mitchell pulled her jacket tighter against the biting wind as she and Agent Rodriguez approached the building, their footsteps crunching on decades of neglected gravel. "This is where it all began," Rodriguez said, consulting his tablet. "Marcus Wheeler spent 6 years here, from 1985 to 1991. The facility closed under mysterious circumstances shortly after he left." Sarah studied the building's weathered facade, noting the similarities to Wheeler's house in Springfield, the same high windows, the same strategic placement of security cameras. Even though the building had been abandoned for years, someone's still maintaining the security system, she observed. "Look at those cameras. They're new." Their investigation had led them here after 3 days of intense document review. Wheeler's childhood records, sealed for decades, had finally been unsealed by court order. What they revealed had shocked even the most seasoned investigators. "Sarah," Rodriguez called from near an old maintenance entrance. "Look at this." Carved into the wooden door frame, barely visible beneath years of paint, was a crude inscription. "MW was here. They'll never believe you." Sarah photographed the carving while Rodriguez radioed for the forensics team to document it. How old would he have been when he wrote this? According to the records, 14, Rodriguez replied, his expression grim. The same year, 3 staff members disappeared without a trace. The case was never solved. Inside, their flashlight beams revealed a facility frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture and forgotten personal items suggested a hasty evacuation. But something else caught Sarah's attention: fresh footprints in the dust. "Someone's been here recently," she whispered, drawing her weapon. Rodriguez did the same, and they proceeded with tactical precision through the building's dark corridors. The administrative office yielded their first major discovery. Behind a false wall, revealed by Rodriguez's careful inspection, they found a room full of meticulously maintained files. Not the decades-old records they'd expected, but current documents, financial records, photographs, and correspondence dating to the present day. This isn't just about Wheeler's past, Sarah realized, leafing through the files. They've been using this place as a dead drop for their current operations. A sudden noise from above made them both freeze. Footsteps, followed by the distinct sound of a door closing. They weren't alone in the building. "FBI, stop where you are." Rodriguez's voice echoed through the empty halls as they raced upstairs. But when they reached the 3rd floor, they found only an open window, curtains billowing in the wind, and a single manila envelope left on a dusty desk. Inside the envelope was a single photograph of Sarah's house, taken that morning, with her teenage daughter Katie waiting for the school bus. On the back was written a simple message: "Some history should stay buried, Officer Mitchell." Sarah's hands shook as she showed the photo to Rodriguez. "They're watching my family now. We need to get you both into protective custody," Rodriguez began, but Sarah cut him off. "No, that's exactly what they want, to scare us off the investigation." She pulled out her phone and dialed home. "Katie, pack a bag. You're going to stay with Aunt Mary in Connecticut for a while." As they waited for backup to arrive and secure the scene, Sarah and Rodriguez continued their investigation. The files they discovered painted a disturbing picture. Wheeler's time at the children's home hadn't made him a victim. It had made him an apprentice. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, holding up a yellowed newspaper clipping. "The director of the home when Wheeler was here, Douglas Blackwood. He disappeared the day the facility closed, along with nearly $500,000 in state funding." Sarah was examining a more recent document. "And look at this, monthly payments from one of Wheeler's shell companies to a DB consulting group, registered in the Cayman Islands. He's still alive, David, and he's been working with Wheeler this whole time." The forensics team arrived as afternoon shadows lengthened across the property. As they worked, Sarah noticed something odd about the building's layout. "These walls don't match the blueprint," she noted, comparing the current floor plan to the original architectural drawings. "There's a space here that's unaccounted for." It took the team 2 hours to locate the hidden room, concealed behind a mechanized panel activated by a pressure plate beneath a specific floorboard. What they found inside made even the most hardened investigators pause. Detailed plans, 4 care homes across New England, each designed to replicate the Vermont facility's most sinister features. This wasn't just Wheeler's past, Sarah realized. It was his blueprint. Everything he did in Springfield, he learned here first. A previously encrypted file from Wheeler's computer, finally cracked by the FBI's tech team, confirmed their suspicions. Douglas Blackwood hadn't just been the home's director, he was the original benefactor, the architect of a system that had spent decades hiding in plain sight. As they prepared to leave the facility, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Emma Sullivan. "Officer Mitchell, I remembered something. Mr. Wheeler used to talk on the phone with someone he called the teacher. He said everything he knew, he learned from him." Sarah showed the message to Rodriguez. "Emma might have just given us the connection we needed. Blackwood wasn't just running this place. He was training Wheeler to continue his work." Back at the command center, the investigation took on new urgency. Wheeler's network wasn't just about exploitation. It was about legacy, about passing on methods and connections to a new generation of predators. Late that night, as Sarah finally prepared to head home, she found a handwritten note on her car windshield. History repeats itself, Officer Mitchell. Ask yourself, who trained the teacher? The question haunted her as she drove home through Springfield's quiet streets. The Vermont Children's Home had opened in 1952, but the records they'd found only went back to 1980. What had happened in those missing years? How many others like Wheeler had learned their twisted trade within those walls? Her phone rang. Rodriguez, his voice urgent. Sarah, we found something in the oldest wing of the building. Names carved into the basement walls. Dates going back to the 1950s. This goes deeper than we imagined. Sarah pulled over, her hands gripping the steering wheel. How many names? Dozens. And Sarah, some of them are still in positions of power today. Judges, politicians, business leaders. This isn't just about Wheeler or Blackwood. It's about a system that's been growing for generations. The implications were staggering. Wheeler wasn't just one corrupt individual. He was part of a legacy, a carefully maintained system of power and exploitation that had been operating for decades. As she finally pulled into her driveway, Sarah noticed a car she didn't recognize parked across the street. It pulled away as soon as her headlights hit it, but she caught a glimpse of the driver, an elderly man in a suit, his silver hair immaculate. Her phone buzzed one final time that night. A message from an unknown number. You've seen the past, Officer Mitchell. The question is, are you ready to face the present? Sarah stared at the message, thinking of Emma's courage, of the names on those basement walls, of generations of silence finally being broken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, and perhaps new allies. But for tonight, she had glimpsed the true scope of what they were fighting, not just a criminal, but a legacy of corruption that had woven itself into the very fabric of power. The real question wasn't about the past anymore. It was about who would shape the future. The interview room at the Springfield FBI field office was designed to be comforting: soft colors, comfortable furniture, and child-friendly decorations. But as Sarah Mitchell watched through the one-way glass, she could see the tension in Emma Sullivan's shoulders as the girl prepared to give her official testimony. She shouldn't have to do this again, Sarah muttered, more to herself than to Agent Rodriguez standing beside her. Her testimony could break this case wide open, Rodriguez replied softly. She sees things others miss, notices patterns adults overlook. Inside the room, Emma sat with her parents and Dr. Patricia Chen, the FBI's top child psychologist. The girl's composure was remarkable as she began to speak, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. It wasn't just about keeping us locked up, Emma explained, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the table. Mr. Wheeler was preparing us for something. He called it graduation. Every few months, some kids would disappear. He'd say they'd graduated, but I knew something was wrong. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists as Emma continued. The girl's detailed observations painted a picture of an operation far more sophisticated than they'd initially suspected. There were codes, Emma said, pulling out pages from her diary. The adults who came to the house, they'd use special words. When they talked about special programs, they meant choosing kids. Resources meant money. And the garden, that's what they called wherever kids went after graduation. Dr. Chun gently guided Emma through her memories, helping her recall specific dates and names. The girl's recall was extraordinary, thanks to her secret diary and keen observation skills. Judge Harrison came the most, Emma continued. He and Mr. Wheeler would argue about something called Phase 3. The judge wanted to wait, said it was too risky, but Mr. Wheeler kept saying their benefactor was getting impatient. A knock at the observation room door interrupted Sarah's concentration. A junior agent entered, his face pale. Officer Mitchell. Agent Rodriguez, you need to see this. They followed him to the command center, where dozens of screens displayed breaking news. Judge Michael Harrison had been found dead in his garage, an apparent suicide. His note claimed responsibility for helping Wheeler but named no other accomplices. This isn't suicide, Sarah said immediately. This is cleanup. They're tying off loose ends. Rodriguez was already on his phone, ordering protection for other potential witnesses. But Sarah's attention was drawn to a detail in the news footage. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit, standing in the background of the crime scene, watching the reporters with cold interest. "Freeze that frame," she ordered. When the tech team complied, she pointed to the man. "I've seen him before. Outside my house last night." Rodriguez studied the image. Running facial recognition now. Got a hit. Douglas Blackwood, age 78. Former director of the Vermont Children's Home. But according to official records, he died in 1991. He's the teacher, Sarah realized. The one Wheeler learned from. He's still pulling strings. Back in the interview room, Emma had moved on to describing the regular visitors to Wheeler's house. Her detailed descriptions matched several prominent community figures: the school superintendent, 2 city council members, and most disturbingly, the chief of the neighboring county's police department. "They're everywhere," Emma said, her voice finally showing a trace of fear. "Mr. Wheeler used to brag about it. Said no one would ever believe us because his friends controlled everything." A commotion in the hallway drew Sarah's attention. Lisa Chen, one of the younger children rescued from Wheeler's house, had arrived with her parents for her own interview. But something was wrong. The girl was hysterical, clinging to her mother. "They were at our house," Lisa sobbed. "The silver man. He was watching through the windows." Sarah and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Blackwood was making his presence known, sending a clear message to potential witnesses. Emma, hearing Lisa's cries through the interview room door, immediately stood up. Despite her parents' protests, she walked out to the hallway and approached the younger girl. "Lisa," Emma said softly, kneeling beside her. "Remember what I taught you in the house? Our special code? When we're scared, we become warriors. And warriors protect each other by telling the truth." Sarah watched in amazement as Emma calmed Lisa down, using techniques she'd developed during their captivity to help the younger children cope. Even now, Emma's protective instincts were helping break down the walls of fear Wheeler and his associates had built. As the day progressed, more survivors came forward, each bringing new pieces of the puzzle. Emma's detailed records helped them correlate stories, building a comprehensive picture of Wheeler's operation and its connections to powerful figures across New England. But with each new testimony, the danger grew. By evening, 3 more potential witnesses had reported seeing the silver-haired man near their homes. Judge Harrison's suicide had sent a clear message. No one who knew the truth was safe. Sarah was reviewing security footage when Rodriguez burst into her office. "We found something in Harrison's house. Hidden files, decades of records. Sarah, this goes all the way to the state capitol. Governors, senators. They've been protecting this network for generations." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The number was blocked, but she answered anyway, putting it on speaker. "Officer Mitchell." The voice was elderly, cultured, with a hint of amusement. "You've been asking questions about the past. Dangerous questions. Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" "Douglas Blackwood," Sarah replied, signaling Rodriguez to start a trace. "Or do you prefer the teacher?" A soft chuckle. "Names are irrelevant, my dear. What matters is understanding your position. Judge Harrison made his choice. Others will follow. But you have an opportunity here. A chance to protect what matters most. Are you threatening my family? I'm offering you wisdom, learned from decades of experience. Systems exist for a reason, Officer Mitchell. Try to break them and they break you instead. Ask yourself, is your crusade worth the cost?" The line went dead. Rodriguez shook his head. The call had been bounced through too many proxies to trace. Sarah walked to the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of blood red. In the parking lot below, she could see Emma comforting Lisa, the 2 girls forming a bond forged in shared trauma and survival. "They're counting on our fear," Sarah said finally. "They've operated in shadows for so long, they think they're invincible. But they've never faced someone like Emma, someone who documented everything, who refused to be silenced." Rodriguez nodded. "The question is, how many others will follow her example? How many more are ready to break their silence? Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Officer Mitchell, I remembered something else. The Silver Man, Mr. Blackwood, he has a special house too. I heard Mr. Wheeler talking about it. A place called The Garden where everything started. I think I know where it is. Sarah showed the message to Rodriguez. They both knew what it meant. Emma had just given them a lead to the heart of the operation, to the place where Wheeler and others had been trained, where the system had been born. But as night fell over Springfield, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Somewhere out there, Douglas Blackwood was watching, waiting, preparing his next move. The question wasn't just about breaking the silence anymore. It was about surviving long enough to make the truth heard. The garden wasn't what Sarah Mitchell had expected. Hidden in plain sight on the outskirts of Burlington, Vermont, it appeared to be nothing more than an aging corporate retreat center, its manicured lawns and modern architecture designed to deflect suspicion. But as she and Agent Rodriguez approached in the pre-dawn darkness, their tactical team moving silently through the surrounding woods, Sarah could feel the wrongness of the place. Motion sensors everywhere, Rodriguez whispered, studying his thermal imaging display. Security cameras disguised as birdhouses. They've got better protection than most government facilities. Sarah's vest felt heavy as she checked her weapon one final time. Emma's information had led them here, but the girl's last warning echoed in her mind. Be careful, Officer Mitchell. The garden isn't just a place. It's where they make people disappear. The raid was supposed to be synchronized with similar operations across 3 states, targeting locations identified through Wheeler's encrypted files. But something felt off. The garden was too quiet, too still. FBI, we have a warrant. Rodriguez's voice shattered the morning silence as the tactical team breached the main entrance. But inside, they found only empty offices and conference rooms, recently abandoned. They knew we were coming, Sarah realized, noting the still warm coffee cups and humming computers. Someone tipped them off. A sudden crash from the building's east wing sent teams rushing to respond. They found a security guard, elderly and trembling, handcuffed to a radiator. His eyes went wide when he saw Sarah. You're Mitchell, he gasped. They said you'd come. Said to give you this. He nodded toward an envelope tucked into his jacket pocket. Inside was a single photograph, Sarah's daughter Katie at her aunt's house in Connecticut, taken less than an hour ago. On the back was written, "Even safe houses aren't safe, Officer Mitchell. Last chance to walk away." Sarah's hands shook as she showed the photo to Rodriguez. They're always one step ahead. How? Because they've had decades to perfect this. A voice called from the doorway. They spun to find an elderly woman in a janitor's uniform, her white hair pulled back in a severe bun. I've been waiting for someone like you to finally come. The woman introduced herself as Martha Kendrick, former administrator at the garden. She'd been waiting 30 years for a chance to expose the truth. It started in the 50s, Martha explained as they sat in a secure conference room. Powerful men needed a way to protect their secrets, control their interests. Douglas Blackwood offered them a solution. A system so deeply embedded in legitimate institutions that it would be invisible. Martha's testimony, recorded over the next several hours, revealed a network more intricate than they'd imagined. The garden wasn't just a training facility. It was the nexus of a system that had spread its tendrils throughout New England's power structure. Wheeler was one of Blackwood's favorites, Martha continued. He understood the importance of appearances, of hiding horror behind respectability. But he was getting sloppy, too ambitious. That's why they let him fall. Sarah leaned forward. Let him fall? You mean they sacrificed him? Wheeler's arrest was planned, Martha nodded. A controlled breach to protect the wider network. But they didn't count on that girl, Emma. She gathered evidence they didn't know existed. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Officer Mitchell, I remembered something about the garden. Check the paintings in the main hall. Mr. Wheeler said they were special. The paintings seemed ordinary, generic landscapes decorating long corridors. But under ultraviolet light, they revealed something else. Maps, building plans, and lists of names, all hidden in plain sight. My God, Rodriguez breathed. studying the decoded information. These aren't just records, they're insurance. Blackwood documented everything, every person they've corrupted, every operation they've run. But as they worked to document the evidence, Sarah's phone rang again. This time, it was her sister in Connecticut. "Katie's gone." Mary's voice was hysterical. "Someone broke in. They left a note saying they'll contact you with instructions." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. Rodriguez immediately began mobilizing resources, but they all knew the truth. This was Blackwood's endgame. Martha's face had gone pale. "There's something else you need to see," she said, leading them to a hidden room beneath the facility. This is where Blackwood keeps his real records. The room was a testament to decades of meticulous documentation. Files, photographs, and recordings detailed how the organization had grown, how it had placed its people in positions of power across the region. "Look at this," Rodriguez called out, holding up a file. "Everything they have on every person they've compromised. Judges, police chiefs, politicians. All of them either bought or blackmailed." But Sarah's attention was drawn to a recent document, a detailed plan for dealing with their investigation. Wheeler's arrest, Judge Harrison's death, even Katie's kidnapping. It had all been orchestrated. "They're not just trying to stop us," she realized. "They're using us to clean house. Every person we identify, every operation we expose. They're using our investigation to eliminate loose ends and reorganize their network." Martha nodded grimly. Blackwood's specialty, turning threats into opportunities. But he made one mistake. He never thought someone would fight back for the right reasons. Your Emma, she didn't break under fear or pain. She kept records because she believed in justice. A notification pinged on Sarah's phone, an email from an anonymous account. The message was simple: "The Autumn House, midnight. Come alone or she dies. It's time you learned the cost of asking questions." Sarah showed the message to Rodriguez, who immediately began planning a tactical response. But they all knew it wouldn't be simple. Blackwood had spent decades perfecting his system of control and corruption. As they prepared to move out, Martha pulled Sarah aside. "There's something else you should know. Blackwood, he's not just protecting a criminal network. He's protecting a philosophy. He believes society needs people like him, shadows that keep the powerful in line while maintaining order. By exploiting the vulnerable," Sarah's voice was hard. Martha's eyes were sad. "By controlling everyone, Officer Mitchell. The victims, the perpetrators, even the ones who think they're in charge. It's a web that's taken generations to build. Are you sure you're ready to tear it down?" Sarah thought of Katie, of Emma, of all the children whose lives had been stolen by this system of corruption and control. "We're not just going to tear it down," she said, checking her weapon. "We're going to make sure it can never be rebuilt." But as they mobilized for the confrontation ahead, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial. Blackwood had spent decades preparing for every contingency. The question wasn't just whether they could save Katie. It was whether they could finally break a system that had survived every previous attempt to expose it. As night fell over New England, multiple forces were converging. Blackwood and his allies, preparing to protect their empire. Sarah and her team, racing to save Katie and expose the truth. And somewhere, Emma Sullivan was still working, still piecing together the clues that might finally bring down the shadow network that had destroyed so many lives. The final confrontation was coming, but the real question remained. In a system built on secrets and corruption, who could they truly trust? The Autumn House loomed against the starlit sky, its Victorian architecture a dark silhouette on the outskirts of Boston. Sarah Mitchell stood alone at the iron gates, her wire carefully concealed, Rodriguez and his team hidden in the surrounding woods. Her daughter's life hung on what would happen in the next few hours. "Officer Mitchell," the voice came from speakers hidden in the gateposts. "Right on time. Please come in. And do remind Agent Rodriguez that any attempt to follow will have unfortunate consequences." The gates swung open silently. Sarah had never felt more alone as she walked up the curved driveway, fallen leaves crunching beneath her feet. The front door opened before she could reach for it, revealing Douglas Blackwood himself. "Welcome to my home," the silver-haired man said pleasantly, as if this were a social call. Katie's been quite the delightful guest. Such a bright young woman, much like yourself. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her weapon, but Blackwood's slight smile stopped her. Now, we both know that's not why you're here. Please join me in the study. We have much to discuss. The house's interior was a museum of power photographs showing Blackwood with presidents, Supreme Court justices, and business titans spanning decades. In the study, a fire crackled in an ornate fireplace, casting dancing shadows on dark wood panels. "Where's my daughter?" Sarah demanded. Blackwood gestured to a leather armchair. "Safe for now. Please sit. You've earned the right to understand what you're really fighting against." As Sarah sat, her training taking in every detail of the room, Blackwood poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Do you know why Wheeler failed, Officer Mitchell? Not because of your investigation. Not even because of young Emma's remarkable documentation. He failed because he forgot the most important rule: power must remain invisible to be effective." "You mean your network of corruption and exploitation?" Sarah's voice was hard. Blackwood laughed softly. "So black and white. So American. What we built isn't corruption, Officer Mitchell. It's governance. The real kind, not the illusion of democracy they teach in schools." He touched a hidden panel, and one wall of books slid aside to reveal dozens of monitors. Each showed live feeds from locations across New England judges' chambers, police stations, government offices. "For 70 years, we've maintained order," Blackwood continued. "We hold the powerful in check by knowing their secrets, and we control the dangerous by channeling their darker impulses into structured outlets. You exploit the vulnerable to control the corrupt." Sarah's disgust was evident. "We maintain balance," Blackwood corrected. "Every society has its shadows, Officer Mitchell. We simply ensure they serve a purpose." A door opened, and 2 men led Katie into the room. Sarah started to rise, but Blackwood's raised hand stopped her. "She's unharmed, and she'll remain that way depending on your choice." Katie's eyes were clear and angry, so like her mother's. "Don't trust him, Mom. They've been showing me things, trying to convince me they're right." Blackwood smiled approvingly. "Brave girl. You see why I wanted to meet? Why this matters. You and your daughter represent something rare, genuine integrity. We need people like you in the system. You want to recruit us?" Sarah's disbelief was evident. "I want to offer you understanding. And a choice." Blackwood pressed another hidden button, and new images appeared on the monitors. Sarah recognized them immediately: evidence from their investigation, surveillance photos of Rodriguez's team, files on every person helping them. "By tomorrow morning, one of 2 things will happen," Blackwood explained. "Either our associates in federal law enforcement will receive evidence of Agent Rodriguez's corruption, linking him to Wheeler's network. The investigation will collapse, and key witnesses, including young Emma, will face unfortunate accidents." He paused, studying Sarah's face. "Or you join us, take Wheeler's place, but do it right this time. Invisible, controlled. Your daughter joins our youth preparation program, being groomed for future leadership. Your integrity makes you perfect for maintaining our more ethical operations." "You're insane," Sarah whispered. "I'm practical. Wheeler's exposure created instability. We need new blood, people who understand the true purpose of power. You've seen how deep our influence goes. You know you can't stop us, but you could help us be better." Katie's voice cut through the tension. "Mom, they showed me everything. They control judges, politicians, police, everyone. But they're scared of us, of people who won't be controlled." Blackwood's smile tightened slightly. "Perspective, my dear. We're offering your mother a chance to protect what matters most while serving a greater purpose." Sarah stood slowly, her mind racing. "And if I refuse? Then the evidence against Rodriguez is released. Emma's remarkable documentation tragically burns in an accident." "Katie, well, there are always places for bright young minds in our program, willing or not." The grandfather clock in the corner struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the study. Sarah looked at her daughter, seeing her own determination reflected in Katie's eyes. "You know what's fascinating?" Sarah said quietly. You're so focused on controlling everything, you never considered someone might use that against you. Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. Meaning Emma Sullivan isn't the only one who knows how to keep records. Sarah pulled out her phone, showing a live video feed. Every word you've said tonight has been streaming to secure servers. And while you were focused on me, federal agents have been raiding every location on your monitors. The sound of helicopters grew outside, and lights began sweeping the grounds. Blackwood's composed facade cracked for the first time. Impossible. Our sources would have warned us. Unless they were compromised weeks ago, Sarah smiled grimly. Martha Kendrick wasn't just your administrator. She's been working with federal investigators for months. Every person you thought was loyal has been given a choice: help us, or go down with you. Blackwood moved with surprising speed for his age, reaching for a hidden drawer. But Katie was faster, knocking over a heavy lamp. The momentary distraction was all Sarah needed. As she secured Blackwood, Sarah could hear Rodriguez's team breaching the house. The operation was playing out exactly as they'd planned when they'd let Blackwood think he was in control. You still don't understand, Blackwood said as agents led him away. The system is necessary. Without it, chaos will reign. Sarah watched him go, then hugged Katie tightly. No, you never understood. Real justice doesn't need shadows. It needs light. But as mother and daughter walked out of the Autumn house, Sarah knew this wasn't over. Blackwood's network was vast, and some roots might survive. The question wasn't whether they'd caught everyone. It was whether they'd exposed enough to finally let the truth do its work. As dawn broke over Boston, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Emma. Officer Mitchell, there's something else you need to see. Something about where it all really started. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, Sarah felt like they were fighting it in the light. The basement archives of Boston's federal building hummed with activity at midnight. Sarah Mitchell sat surrounded by boxes of evidence seized from the Autumn house, while Emma Sullivan worked quietly beside her, the girl's analytical mind proving invaluable in piecing together decades of carefully hidden connections. Look at this, Emma said, holding up a yellowed photograph. It's from 1952. Mr. Blackwood isn't just in it. He's standing next to the governor. And look who else is there. Sarah studied the image. A group of men stood on the steps of the Vermont State House, all wearing expensive suits and confident smiles. But it was the young boy in the corner that caught her attention. That's Wheeler's father, she realized. Richard Wheeler Sr. He was a state senator. There's more. Emma pulled out a leather-bound ledger. Mr. Wheeler used to talk about his father, about a special legacy he had to protect. I think this is what he meant. Agent Rodriguez entered, carrying fresh coffee and a concerned expression. Sarah, you need to see this. We just finished decrypting Blackwood's personal files. The network, it wasn't just his creation. He inherited it. The evidence they uncovered over the next few hours painted a stunning picture. The system hadn't begun with Blackwood. He had merely perfected it. Its roots stretched back to the aftermath of World War II, when powerful families had created a shadow network to protect their interests. The garden wasn't just a training facility, Sarah said. Reading through the documents, it was their recruiting ground. They identified people they could control through money, through blackmail, or through grooming them from childhood. Emma nodded, her voice quiet but steady. Like Mr. Wheeler, his father brought him into it just like others brought their children. They called it preserving order through generations. Sarah's phone buzzed a message from Katie, who was helping analyze digital evidence at the FBI's cybercrime unit. Mom, you won't believe what we found in Blackwood's encrypted emails. This goes all the way to Washington. The team worked through the night, unraveling decades of carefully woven secrets. The network had spread far beyond New England, with tendrils reaching into federal agencies, international corporations, and even foreign governments. Sarah, Rodriguez called out urgently. We found something about Wheeler's arrest. It wasn't just a controlled sacrifice like Martha thought. Look at this. The document was a series of emails between Blackwood and other network leaders. Wheeler hadn't just been sloppy. He'd been planning to break away, to form his own rival organization. His arrest had been ordered not just to protect the network, but to prevent a power struggle that could have exposed everything. That's why they let me find that sign, Sarah realized. They needed Wheeler contained, but in a way that wouldn't raise questions about the larger organization. But they didn't count on me, Emma said, a hint of pride in her voice. Mr. Wheeler thought I was just another scared kid. He never noticed me watching, remembering, writing everything down. A commotion at the archive entrance drew their attention. Martha Kendrick arrived, escorted by federal agents, her face grave. "We found it," she announced. The original document, Blackwood's insurance policy. Every name, every operation, every connection for the past 70 years. He called it the Legacy Book. The leather-bound volume she placed on the table looked unremarkable, but its contents were explosive. Page after page of names, dates, and coded references that, with Emma's help in breaking their cipher, revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. "Look at this section," Emma pointed. "It's about something called Project Inheritance." They weren't just recruiting powerful people's children. They were manipulating entire family lines, creating dynasties they could control. Sarah studied the pages with growing horror. Judges whose grandchildren were now on the bench, police chiefs whose families had controlled departments for generations, politicians whose bloodlines were carefully maintained through arranged marriages and strategic adoptions. They didn't just build a network, she breathed. They built a shadow aristocracy. Katie arrived with her own discovery, digital evidence showing how the network had adapted to modern technology. "Mom, they had their people embedded in tech companies, social media platforms, even surveillance systems. They could track anyone, manipulate any digital record." But as they dug deeper, something else emerged, signs of fracturing within the network itself. Younger members growing uncomfortable with the old methods, power struggles between different factions, and most importantly, evidence that some had been secretly working to bring it down from within. There, Emma pointed to a series of recent entries. Mr. Wheeler wasn't the only one planning to break away. Others were too, but for different reasons. Some of them wanted to expose everything. Sarah's phone rang, the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts. "Mitchell, are you seeing this? The Legacy Book, it implicates half the power structure on the East Coast. We're talking senators, federal judges, corporate CEOs, and proves them guilty," Sarah finished. Emma's codes, Martha's testimony, the seized records. "We can prove every connection, every crime," but even as they worked, they could feel pressure mounting. News was already breaking about irregularities in the investigation. Social media was flooding with disinformation about Emma's credibility. Orders were coming down from Washington to proceed with caution. "They're still fighting," Rodriguez observed grimly. "Even with Blackwood in custody, the network is trying to protect itself." Sarah looked at Emma, who had been unusually quiet for the past few minutes. The girl was staring at a particular page in the Legacy Book, her face pale. "Emma? What is it?" "There's something else," Emma said softly. "Something bigger. Look at these patterns. The way they move children through different locations, the timing of certain graduations. They weren't just building a power network. They were building something else. Something they called the Final Protocol." Katie, who had been cross-referencing digital records, suddenly gasped. "Mom, she's right. I'm seeing references to some kind of contingency plan. If the network was ever exposed, they had a failsafe. Something that would..." The lights in the archive suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in, but every computer screen had gone dark. "They're making their move," Rodriguez said, drawing his weapon. "This isn't just about saving the network anymore. They're initiating whatever this final protocol is." Sarah pulled Emma close as security alarms began blaring throughout the building. Whatever they had uncovered was bigger than anyone had imagined, and the network's true masters were finally showing their hand. The real war was just beginning, and somewhere in the darkness, the next phase of a 70-year-old conspiracy was about to unfold. The federal building's emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through the smoke-filled corridors as Sarah Mitchell led her small group through the chaos. Emma Sullivan clutched the Legacy Book to her chest, while Katie worked frantically on her laptop, trying to restore their severed communications. Agent Rodriguez brought up the rear, his weapon ready. The secure elevator to the command center is down, Katie reported, her fingers flying over the keyboard. They've locked down the entire building systems. This isn't just a blackout. It's a takeover. Through the windows, they could see similar darkness spreading across downtown Boston. Block by block, the city's lights were going out, as if something was systematically shutting down the power grid. The final protocol, Emma said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Mr. Wheeler used to talk about it, a failsafe that would reset the game board if they ever lost control. I never understood what he meant until now. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming text, somehow still working when all other communications were down. The message was from an unknown number, the garden room. 30 minutes. Bring the book and the girl. Last chance to choose the right side of history. It's a trap, Rodriguez said immediately. Of course it is, Sarah agreed. But it's also our only chance to stop whatever they're doing to the city. They made their way through the darkened building, passing federal agents and police officers trying to maintain order. The power outage had released all the electronic locks, and Sarah could hear shouts and running feet from the detention levels below. They're creating chaos, Emma observed, her analytical mind piecing it together. Just like in Mr. Wheeler's house, when things got dangerous, he would create confusion to cover his real moves. Katie's laptop suddenly beeped. Mom, I got through to the emergency broadcast system. This isn't just happening here. Similar outages are hitting major cities all along the East Coast. Government facilities, financial institutions, communication networks. They're all going dark. They reached the garden room, the federal building's secure conference facility, designed for high-level government meetings. The doors stood open, revealing a scene that made them all pause. Inside, illuminated by emergency lighting, sat not just Douglas Blackwood, but a dozen other elderly men and women, all wearing expensive suits and calm expressions. They were seated around the conference table as if this were a normal board meeting. Officer Mitchell, Blackwood smiled. Or should I say, the woman who thought she could dismantle 70 years of careful planning in a few weeks. Please join us. Bring Emma and the book. Let's discuss the future of our nation. Sarah stepped forward, keeping Emma behind her. You engineered a massive infrastructure attack just to force this meeting? This? Blackwood gestured to the darkness outside. This is merely a demonstration. A taste of what happens when the delicate balance we maintain is disrupted. Do you know what happens to a society when all its systems fail at once? When every dirty secret, every corrupt deal, every hidden crime is suddenly exposed. The truth comes out, Sarah said firmly. Chaos reigns, corrected an elderly woman at the table. Financial markets collapse. Governments fall. Civil order disintegrates. Is that what you want, Officer Mitchell? To tear down the system that's maintained peace and prosperity for generations. Emma stepped forward, still clutching the legacy book. You mean the system that destroys lives to protect the powerful? That turns people into tools? My dear, Blackwood's smile was almost gentle. Who do you think created the world you live in? The comfortable lives, the stable society, the illusion of justice and democracy? Everything you take for granted exists because we manage the shadows. By exploiting the vulnerable, Katie countered, her laptop still working to counter the spreading digital darkness. By controlling the inevitable, another elder corrected. Every society has its darkness, young lady. We simply ensure it serves a productive purpose. Sarah watched as Katie's fingers flew over her keyboard, knowing her daughter was doing more than just monitoring the blackout. They had planned for this, prepared for the moment when the network's true leaders would reveal themselves. The final protocol isn't just about creating chaos, Sarah said, understanding finally dawning. It's about proving you're necessary, showing what happens when your control is removed. Very good, Blackwood nodded. When this night is over, society will face a choice. Accept our continued guidance, or watch their comfortable world tear itself apart. Now, give us the book, step aside, and let us restore order. But Emma had been busy too, her quick mind decoding the last pieces of the puzzle. There's something you don't know, she said, her voice carrying unexpected authority. "Something Mr. Wheeler never told you." The girl opened the legacy book to its final pages, revealing text that made Blackwood's composed facade crack for the first time. "Wheeler didn't just keep records of your operations," Emma continued. "He documented your contingency plans too. Every failsafe, every backup system, every secret protocol. And I've spent weeks helping the FBI's cyber team prepare countermeasures." Katie's laptop suddenly chimed. "Firewalls are up," she announced. "Emergency systems are coming back online. Your shutdown signals are being blocked." The elders were rising now, their calm demeanor shattered as they realized their ultimate weapon was being neutralized. "Impossible," Blackwood snarled. "The protocol is hardwired into every major system on the East Coast. You can't just shut it down." "No," Sarah agreed, "but we can reveal it. Right now, every law enforcement agency, every media outlet, every digital platform is receiving documented proof of your network's existence. Not just your crimes, but your entire system of control. The chaos you threatened?" Emma added, "It's coming, but not the way you planned. People will know the truth, all of it. They'll choose what happens next, not you." Rodriguez's team was moving in now, surrounding the room, but Blackwood had one final card to play. "You fools," he said softly. "You think exposing us ends this? We're not the disease, we're the treatment. Without us, the darkness in human nature runs wild. You're not ending corruption. You're unleashing it." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Maybe, or maybe people deserve the chance to face their shadows in the light, to choose justice over control." The arrests began as city lights started flickering back to life. But as Sarah watched the elders being led away, she knew Blackwood was partly right. Exposing the network wouldn't automatically fix society's problems. Yet seeing Emma's determination, Katie's skilled resistance, and the hundreds of law enforcement officers who had chosen justice over power, she felt real hope. The network had spent 70 years controlling darkness through darkness. Maybe it was time to try controlling it through light. Outside, dawn was breaking over Boston. The city had survived the night, and with it, the chokehold of a system that had shaped American power for generations. But the real work, building something better in its place, was just beginning. Sarah's phone buzzed one final time. A message from Martha. "It's not over. Some of them are still out there, planning, adapting. The shadow never dies completely." Sarah looked at Emma and Katie, who had fought so hard for truth, and Rodriguez, who had risked everything for justice. "Then we'll keep fighting," she said simply. "In the light, where they can't hide anymore." 1 year later, the gardens of the former Vermont Children's Home bloomed with new life. Where shadow and secrets once ruled, children's laughter now filled the air. Sarah Mitchell stood at the entrance, watching as families gathered for the opening of the New Beginnings Recovery Center, a place of healing built from the ashes of exploitation. Emma Sullivan, now 15, stood at the podium, her voice strong as she addressed the crowd. "This place used to represent everything wrong with power and control. Today, we're turning it into something else. A place where survivors help survivors, where truth defeats darkness, and where healing begins." The aftermath of the network's exposure had shaken American society to its core. Hundreds of powerful figures had been arrested, from judges and politicians to business leaders and law enforcement officials. But more importantly, thousands of survivors had finally found their voices, their stories breaking decades of enforced silence. Katie, working with a team of ethical hackers, had helped create a secure digital platform where evidence could be safely shared and documented. The legacy archives, as they became known, ensured that no shadow network could ever again hide its operations behind walls of power and privilege. "Mom," Katie called out, waving Sarah over to her laptop. "You need to see this. Remember those offshore accounts we couldn't trace?" Martha found something. Sarah looked at the screen, where financial records revealed one last piece of the puzzle. The network's wealth, billions in hidden assets, had been automatically transferred upon their exposure not to secret accounts, but to a trust fund dedicated to helping survivors and preventing future abuse of power. Wheeler, Sarah realized, this was his final failsafe. not to protect the network, but to ensure some form of restitution if they were exposed. He was more complicated than we thought, Emma said, joining them after her speech. In his own twisted way, he wanted the system to fall. That's why he let me keep documenting everything. He knew someday someone like you would come along, Officer Mitchell. The center's opening ceremony continued as federal agents provided updates on the ongoing investigations. Douglas Blackwood and the network's elders faced life sentences. Their claims of necessary evil rejected by courts and public opinion alike. But more importantly, their philosophy of controlled corruption had been replaced by a new movement towards transparency and accountability. Rodriguez, newly promoted to lead a special task force, shared the latest findings. We're still uncovering connections, but the network's power is broken. More importantly, we've identified similar patterns in other regions. This wasn't just about New England. It was a template they were planning to expand nationally. And now it's a template for fighting back, Katie added, showing them her latest project, a software platform that could identify patterns of institutional corruption and abuse of power. We're teaching other law enforcement agencies how to spot the signs, how to protect witnesses, how to break the cycles of silence. Sarah watched as more families arrived at the center, many of them survivors of the network's decades-long operation. Where once there had been shame and isolation, now there was a community of support and understanding. The shadows hadn't been defeated entirely. Human nature ensured that corruption and exploitation would always exist, but they no longer ruled unchallenged. Officer Mitchell, a young girl about 7 years old, approached shyly. Emma told us you're the one who saw the sign, who came to help when no one else would. Sarah knelt down to the girl's level, remembering that morning that seemed so long ago. I just did what any good police officer would do. The real heroes are people like Emma, who never stopped fighting for the truth. And now we teach others to do the same, Emma added, joining them. That's what this place is about. Turning pain into power, secrets into strength. The day continued with tours of the facility, where former offices of control had been transformed into counseling rooms, art therapy spaces, and education centers. The secure rooms and surveillance systems had been replaced by gardens and playgrounds, the tools of oppression converted to instruments of healing. As evening approached, Sarah found herself in the central courtyard with Emma and Katie, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors of hope. Do you think it's really over? Katie asked, still monitoring her security programs for any signs of the network trying to rebuild. Not entirely, Sarah admitted. Martha was right, shadows never die completely, but they can't control what's brought into the light. Emma nodded, her maturity still sometimes startling. That's why we keep telling our stories, keep watching for the signs. Not from fear, but because we know the truth is stronger than any system of control. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Rodriguez. You need to see this. Wheeler left one final message. They gathered in the center's new media room, where Rodriguez played a video file recovered from Wheeler's encrypted archives. On screen, Marcus Wheeler, recorded shortly before his arrest, spoke directly to the camera. To whoever finds this, you've done what I couldn't. Broken the cycle, exposed the truth. The network was built to control society's darkness, but became the darkness itself. Power corrupts, but secrets corrupt absolutely. The children I hurt, I can't undo that damage. But I could leave a trail of breadcrumbs, choose the right person to document everything, and wait for someone with the courage to act. The video ended, leaving them in thoughtful silence. Wheeler's attempt at redemption didn't excuse his crimes, but it had helped bring down a system that had destroyed countless lives. So what now? Katie asked, closing her laptop. Sarah looked around at what they'd built, not just the recovery center, but a new way of fighting darkness. Now we keep working, keep watching, keep helping others find their voice and strength. And we remember, Emma added, her hand touching the diary that had helped expose everything. Not just the pain, but the triumph. The proof that no system of control is stronger than people willing to stand for truth. As night fell over the Vermont hills, the New Beginnings Recovery Center glowed with warm light, a beacon of hope where shadows once ruled. Inside, survivors shared their stories, helping others find the strength to speak. In offices and counseling rooms, new tools and methods were being developed to protect the vulnerable and expose corruption. Sarah Mitchell looked at her daughter Katie, at Emma Sullivan, at all the lives touched by their fight for justice, and felt a deep sense of peace. The network's shadow had been broken, not by force or control, but by the simplest and most powerful weapon of all, the courage to shine light into darkness. The story wasn't over. It never really would be. But now it was a story of hope, of healing, of the triumph of truth over power. And somewhere, in cities and towns across America, others were learning to spot the signs, to speak up, to fight back. The shadows would always exist, but they no longer ruled unopposed. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.